December 21st, 2014, from the Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the Cleveland Browns at the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers would get the ball first, and they'd start off on their own 22 after the kickoff. And they would end up bringing the ball to midfield, and on 2nd and 9 from the 50, Cam Newton hit Cotchery for an 18-yard reception, a first down on the 32. They were then faced with a 3rd and 3 on the 25, but then Stewart lost 6 yards, and out would come Gano to attempt a 49-yard field goal. It was up, and it was no good. It was wide right the whole time. It just kept sailing straight on right to the right. And so anyway, it was still remained knotted up at 0 apiece, and now Cleveland would take over after the missed field goal on their own 39, but they would go 3 and out and end up punting from their own 46. So now Carolina would take over for the second time in this game. They had the ball now on their own 19 to begin this second possession, and they had it on with about 9 minutes left in the first quarter. They'd pick up some first downs and get to midfield and into Cleveland territory. It was 1st and 10 on the Cleveland 48. Stewart picked up 17 yards on a run, and then he picked up another 13 yards on another run. They would bring the ball to the red zone at the Cleveland 18 for the Panthers. Tolbert then picked up 8 yards, and then another 5 yards on 2nd down to make it 1st and goal on the 5. But they weren't able to get it into the end zone, and out would come Gano to attempt his second field goal of the game. This one a 23-yarder. It was up, and it was good. So Gano was now 1 for 2, and he put the first points on the scoreboard with the score now Carolina 3, Cleveland 0. So now the Browns would get the ball with less than 3 minutes left in the first quarter. They had it on their own 20. They'd pick up a first down when Manziel hit Hawkins for a 28-yard reception on 3rd and 7 from the 23, and that brought the ball to the Carolina 49. But then Crowell lost 3 yards, and that would make it 2nd and 13 from the 48, and Crowell picked up 5 yards, and the first quarter came to a close. So after 1 quarter of play, the score was Carolina 3, Cleveland 0. So now to begin the second quarter, the Browns had the ball on the Carolina 47. It was 3rd and 8, and a penalty, a personal foul against Carolina would make it a first down on the 32 for the Browns. But they weren't able to get a first down, and out would come Hartley to attempt a 43-yard field goal. A few plays later, it was up, it was good, and this game was now tied up at 3 apiece as Hartley put the first points on the board for the Browns. So now Carolina would get the ball after the kickoff, and they would start off this possession on their own 20 with about 13.5 minutes left before halftime. But after 6 plays, they would end up punting from the 42. So now Cleveland would get the ball with about 10 minutes left in the second quarter. They had it on their own 22, and they ended up going 3 and out and punting from the 27. There was actually a penalty against the Browns for fair catch interference on the punt, and so Carolina would start off their possession on their own 43 with about 8.5 minutes left before halftime. They picked up some first downs, and they got into the red zone, but then on 1st and 10, they picked up a false start that would move them backwards, and then they ended up with a 7-yard run by Cam Newton. That made it 2nd and 8 from the 15. Newton then hit Dickson for a 10-yard reception that made a 1st and goal on the 5. Stewart ran for 3 yards, and after a run by no gain from Tolbert, it was 3rd and goal on the 2 when Cam Newton took it into the end zone himself as Superman scored on the 2-yard touchdown run, the first touchdown of the game for either team, and the Carolina Panthers took back the lead now by 7 with the score Carolina 10, Cleveland 3. So now the Browns get the ball with less than 2 minutes left before halftime. They had it on their own 20 to start this possession, and Manziel on first down would end up losing a yard as he was tackled by Kuechly and Jones, and they actually took him out the game. Apparently some kind of hamstring issue, and out would come Brian Hoyer to under center for Cleveland. So Manziel had gotten the start last week and this week as well, but now here was Hoyer back under center for Cleveland. But they weren't able to get anything going, and they would end up going 3 and out on this possession as they would punt from their own 24. So now the Panthers get the ball with a little over a minute left still in the first half. They had on their own 25, but a penalty on 2nd down, a personal foul, would move them back to the 14, 3rd and 21, and they would just try to run the clock out with a run by Whitaker, but Cleveland used their final timeout and so the Panthers would have to punt the ball from their own 19 on 4th and 16, and now Cleveland would take over on their own 16 after the punt, but they didn't get anything going, and this game would go to halftime. So at the end of the first half, the score was Carolina 10, Cleveland 3. So now to begin the third quarter, the Browns would start off with the ball on their 32 after the kickoff. They were faced with a 2nd and 10 from the 32, and Crowell picked up 26 yards in the first down that brought the ball to the Carolina 42. But on 2nd and 10 from the 42, Brian Hoyer was sacked for a 3-yard loss by Johnson, and 2 plays later, the punting unit came out to punt from the Carolina 45. So now the Panthers would start off with the ball on their own 20 after the punt, and they would move it into Cleveland territory. But on 3rd and 7 from the 36, Cam Newton was intercepted by Wynn, and so now the Browns would take over on their own 44 with about a little less than 8.5 minutes left in the third. They ended up moving the ball into Carolina territory, and they ended up bringing it all the way to the red zone. But on 4th and 2 from the 13, they elected to go for the field goal, and out came Garrett Hartley to attempt the 31-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Browns cut the Panthers' lead to 4 with the score Carolina 10, Cleveland 6. So now the Panthers would have the ball on their own 6-yard line after the kickoff. They had a penalty for an illegal wedge on the kickoff, and that's why they were on the 6. They would end up being faced with a 2nd and 4 from the 12. Stewart picked up 4 on the first down at the 16, but they would end up having to punt the ball from their 19 on the final play of the third quarter. So after 3 quarters of play, the score was Carolina 10, Cleveland 6. Now to open up the fourth quarter, the Browns had the ball on their own 45 after the punt, but they would end up faced with a 3rd and 10 from the 45. Hoyer out of the shotgun. He was sacked by Ely, and so the sack, the 12-yard loss, would bring out the punting unit as they would punt from the 33. And so now Carolina would take over on their own 21 with 14 minutes left in the fourth quarter. But after 4 plays, they would end up punting from their 37. So now the Browns get the ball back on their own 15 with a little less than 11.5 left in regulation. They were faced with a 3rd and 6 from the 19. Hoyer out of the shotgun, drops back, and he hit Jordan Cameron, and Jordan Cameron takes it all the way 81 yards for the touchdown to give the Browns the lead, with the score now Cleveland 13, Carolina 10. So now the Panthers would take over on their own 34 after a 31-yard return by Whitaker on the kickoff. And on first down, Cam Newton hit Greg Olsen for a 21-yard reception, a first down in the Cleveland territory at the 45. Then on 3rd and 1 from the 36, Cam Newton took it himself 13 yards for a first down on the 23. And then ended up being a pass, Cam Newton to Breslin for 14 yards, but it was challenged. It was incomplete. And it was actually ruled incomplete. They challenged it, and it was reversed that it was a complete pass, that he did get the catch. And so now it's 1st and goal on the 9, and after an incomplete pass brought up 2nd down, Cam Newton out of the no huddle hits John Stewart, the Green Lantern, takes it in for the 9-yard touchdown to give the Panthers back the lead by 4 with the score Carolina 17, Cleveland 13. So now the Browns would get the ball with 7 minutes left to play, down by 4. They had it on their own 20 after the kickoff. It was a touchback. And now Hoyer dropped back to pass. He was intercepted by Norman. And then Norman ended up fumbling the ball. It was recovered by Benjamin. But then they ended up reviewing it. It was challenged. The fumble was challenged, and it was ruled that it was a fumble. And so now the Browns, after the interception, got the ball back. So 2 turnovers on the same play. So now the Browns had the ball on their own 29, less than 7 minutes left in the fourth. They did pick up a first down. They ended up even getting into Carolina territory. But then on 2nd and 14 from the 49, Hoyer was sacked by Short. And then they weren't able to pick up a first down, and so the punting unit would come out to punt from the 50. So now Carolina would take back over, up by 4 with 3.5 left in regulation, and the ball on their own 20 after the punt. They were faced with a 2nd and 9 from the 21, and Cam Newton hit Dickson for a 34-yard pass that brought the ball all the way to Cleveland 45 and brought the game to the 2-minute warning. Stewart then ran for 3 yards, and Cleveland took a timeout. And they would end up, both teams would use up their final timeouts. And then on 3rd and 5 from the 40, Stewart, the Green Lantern, takes it 30 yards all the way to the red zone to the Cleveland 10-yard line. And then at this point, all that really was left to do was to take the knees, and that's what they did. Is Cam Newton took a couple knees, and this game came to a close with the final score: Carolina 17, Cleveland 13. And with the win, the Panthers are now 6-8-1. They're 4-4. They're 500 at home on the season. So they entered the game just a half a game out of first place in the South. And now the Saints have lost. They're ahead of the Saints, but they're still a half game back of the Falcons with one game left to play. And the Browns are now 7-8. They're 3-4 on the road. They have one road game left, and we'll see if they can get to 500 next week. But in this game, Cam Newton was 18 for 31 with 201 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. He also had 12 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. Brian Hoyer, who had come in relief of Johnny Manziel, was 17 for 13 for 134 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. He had 19 yards off of 2 carries. And Manziel, before he left the game, was 3 for 8 for 32 yards and 3 yards on the ground off of 2 carries. The leading rusher in this game was the Green Lantern, John Stewart. He had 24 carries for 122 yards. And the leading rusher for the Browns was Isaiah Crowell. He had 55 yards off of 16 carries. And the leading receiver was the tight end Jordan Cameron of Cleveland. He had 3 receptions for 88 yards, including a touchdown. Josh Gordon had 4 receptions for 45 yards. And the leading receiver for the Panthers was the rookie Kelvin Benjamin. He had 5 receptions for 47 yards. Jericho Cotchery had 5 receptions for 46 yards. And Dickson had 2 receptions for 44 yards. And on defense, the game's leading tackler was for Cleveland. Carlos Dansby had 12 tackles in this game. And Whitner and Robertson each had 8 tackles. The leading tackler for the Panthers was Luke Kuechly. He had 7 tackles. The Panthers combined for 3 sacks as Short, Johnson, and Ely each had a sack apiece. The Browns had 1 sack, and that was Solomon, who had their lone sack. Each team had an interception, win for the Browns, and Norman for the Panthers. It's a close game coming down to the wire. These teams are going back and forth. But in the end, John Stewart catches that 9-yard touchdown pass from Cam Newton with 7 minutes left to play. So the Panthers took the lead for the final time. Their defense closed it out. They win by 4 with the final score: Carolina 17, Cleveland 13.